Hello, everybody. Welcome once more. This is our fourth session, and we are going to be talking about storytelling with data. And the learning objectives for today, or the learning objective for today, is going to summarize how storytelling techniques can make data meaningful. And we are just going to define storytelling, how we can apply those concepts into data visualization, and why we're talking about this. And we need to go and look, for example, to what Susan Goldberg said. She's the chief of the National Geographic, chief editor of the National Geographic magazine, and she had a conference in the Rise of Storytelling. And here we have an image of her introducing Dr. Fossey in a conference. But basically, what they believe, and everybody is familiar with National Geographic, and they believe is in the power of science, exploration, and storytelling to change the world. And if you remember, or you recall, or you pay attention to National Geographic, it has stories, but it has a lot of visual appealing. And that's something that definitely it's a plus in the way that they capture audiences and bring science and bring knowledge to the masses. And also, if we look into other authors, then think about that our world is saturated with data, and that data is creating a lot of information, sometimes misinformation. And in that context, visualizations are going to be that way to break through the clutter. It's going to help us to clean what is going on there and tell stories, persuade people, and be able to change action. And that's something that is out there in the media. We need to think about that, and this justify why we need to understand the concepts behind storytelling, or a data visualization for storytelling. Then we have been discussing before, and we have introduced the concept how data provides us with much more of a back story that we usually realize. Remember that we have this way of having insights, and when we are manipulating data, when we are interacting with data, we can have start exploring hypotheses, have some ideas, try to relate with cause effect. And in recent years, there has been a really big interest in, okay, how we are really going to take that storytelling potential and put that into a data visualization. And we see how New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, they are incorporating those dynamic interactive graphics into the way that they tell stories or they do journalism. And also we see politicians, activists, television reporters, they are using interactive visualization for the stories, from the Weather Channel or for the weather section, and to illustrate different phenomena, but also about the global health, about economics, about elections. Because that's a way to translate some complex concepts into something that people can digest easily. And this is basically a melting pot from computer science, statistics, artistic design, storytelling, what is happening here. But how do we define data storytelling? And basically, when we are talking about data storytelling, or a single word storytelling, is a process where we create a story. We create a narrative that is product of data analysis, or the findings that we have from that analysis. And when we create that story, then we can facilitate that laymen, people, and laywomen, people in general, understand that complex phenomenon that we are trying to illustrate, and then use that data to create information and make their decisions and be able to have an action. Then, if we go back to COVID, then hey, what's important to use a mask? Then having visuals, hey, this is how the virus is transmitted. That's why the 6 feet, the 2 meters distance of social distancing is important. Or why using masks is important, and you can illustrate complex things to the subjects. And if you remember when we were growing up, then yes, we grow about stories, and those stories are full of metaphors, full of fables there that are going to teach us something, and that's what we are going to be borrowing. Yes, how we teach people, how we inform them, how we pursue them to change their behavior or take an action. And definitely, any insight that we gain from data analysis needs to be communicated. But data visualization is helping us to communicate that to people that are not familiar with the data. Um, that facilitates that understanding, and basically that teaches, because in storytelling we are going to use metaphors that are going to be easy to consume by the people, and bring that concept closer to them. And crafting a narrative is definitely a really, really effective way to communicate. Telling stories is the way that we relate. That's why we like series and TV. That's why reading fiction is appealing to some people. Or if you like comedy, there is a story behind that. There is a narrative behind that. And we have studied also that visuals are the easiest medium to the brain to capture that data, to capture that communication. Therefore, if you mix the narrative or and the a crafted narrative, and the visual cues into data storytelling, we are going to have a much more effective way to present data, or at least that's what theory says, no? And definitely, when we study this storytelling with data visualization, it's a valuable skill that we need to understand, that we need to develop, and it's part of the exercise that we are going to be doing with the class. We already have gained some insights of concepts, we have already gained some insights of some methods. We already studied the typology of the types of things that people use to interact, the type of things or tasks that people perform when they are using data or seeking for answers to questions. Then, in that order of ideas, definitely we can say that successful data stories, they require a diverse set of skills, and that set of skills is similar to that the movie directors have, and is beyond a technical expert's knowledge of computer engineering or science. This is sometimes more art than science. That skill is really, really crafted in that domain. That's why there are people that is really, they are really good writers and they attract people. Others are not that successful. I'm I don't intend to make everybody in the class a storyteller, but at least understand the power of storytelling and approach to some of the concepts in how you can use the data visualizations to enhance the message that we are transmitting to the people, how we can use that to transform the beliefs, the actions, and ultimately the healthcare. And in that order of ideas, then there are a combination of elements or skills that we need to have in order to do storytelling. The first skill that we need to develop is the context communication. How we communicate in a context, how we create message that is appropriate for the public, how we craft that narrative that is going to be appealing to the intended audience. And we need to have skills in visual design. And when you combine visual design and context communication, we are talking about human-centered designs. And those that already took the class of system design, we have talked a lot of this, how the human factors needs to be taken into consideration in the way that we communicate, in the way that we represent things. And during the class, we have been touching some of these elements as well. But when we use context communication, visual designs together, then we are in the domain of the human-centered design. The third element that we need to have skills is in the data manipulation, data management, data understanding, data transformation. And we have introduced those concepts at the beginning of this series of classes. And when you combine visual design and data, then we are in the domain of data visualization, and that's much of the effort that we are going to be doing in this class. The fourth element is to create a narrative, be capable of tell stories. And if you mix narrative with data, is when we have data reporting. You are going to be doing an exercise that is the first homework in a data visualization report. You are going to tell story to try to create a narrative based on reporting your tasks, reporting your findings, and reporting your hypothesis, and that's going to be that first homework that we are doing. And when you combine the elements of narrative and the elements of context communication, contextual communication, then we are in the domain of storytelling. If we combine all of the things, then communication, visual design, data, and narrative, or we bring human-centered design, data visualization, data reporting, and storytelling, then we are talking about data storytelling, or storytelling used with data. If we think about this is something that requires practice, and as I said, it's not that everybody is going to have the same skills. Not everybody knows how to create narratives. So we are going to approach in some way and some techniques that are going to help us to get closer there, but something that you definitely will gain with the practice. Now, let's go and travel on time. And some of you may be familiar with this graph or this map. And those that are not familiar with this map, then let me introduce what is known in history as the Minard's map. And this Minard's map is a visual representation and a way of storytelling about the Napoleon's campaign when he was trying to invade Russia in 1812. And you can see in the map that we have a segment that seems to be like in sand color or beige color here. Originally it was actually red, but it has been decayed with the time. And that's the campaign from France to Moscow. And we can see the width of the bar of the graph is the size of the army. And we can see where the different contingents or the different sections of the army were splitting and settling in some spaces. we can see how that army was being reduced all the way to Moscow, and how it continued to be reduced in the way back. And here they collect part of the people that they left behind and they join them, and here they join back, and you can see all the people that left for the campaign and the few that came back. This is a story by itself, and of course you can see the narrative that is here, and then it says, oh, this is the campaign from 1812 to 1813, and some comments about this. Also, there is a table that is showing the different temperature that they were experiencing, especially in the return campaign. And you can see the relationships there, and how that winter definitely had an effect in the number of men that survived. And yes, it was true that they didn't reach there, but it seems that the weather have a lot to do on how the temperature in made some of those deaths, unfortunately. And you can see how we have huge amount of data here, and we are communicating an entire military campaign, no? And keeping it simple and using contrasting, and also it has geographical information, location. There is something that is missing here. There is actually a sense of time, but still it's a narrative, it's a story, it's a picture over time and space of what happened, and we can correlate these external elements, and we can correlate the different location, and this is giving us a better understanding of what was happening in that campaign. And that's what we call storytelling with a visualization. And what is the story concept? Then basically, when we are talking about stories in the context of analytics, it's an abstraction that the intelligence analysts, or the people, the data analysts, the data scientists, use to understand patterns, and is part of the analytical process. Then, and as I was narrating, what I'm seeing here, or as Minard was narrating here, the interpretation of his information, us and you as a analyst of data, you can create those narratives, you can create those interpretations, you can tell that story in order to attract the attention of the subjects. And a story is something that is important in the way that it offers context to the data, because sometimes we are not able to abstract things, but when you start explaining the meaning of different elements that you have visual there, hey, that makes sense, and then that start clicking in our brain, and in that way the audience starts to apply their tacit knowledge in a more concrete way. And definitely this is a way that is going to improve that communication, and be able to create situational awareness. It's going to help the people to relate with the information, and make easier to understand things. And those stories can be used not only to support a discussion or a decision making that are the original aims, but also they are going to support what we were saying, the analysis process, and the people understand and bring and find their own conclusions. Now, When we go from a story that is basically that abstraction of, hey, what is going on, and we want to introduce the concept of storytelling, then is how we create a dynamic based on the story. And there are authors that combine the concept of story and narrative. And at the end, this is a mean to communicate a sequence of events that are related to the experience of different characters. And who was the character that Minar was describing? Was the Napoleon's army, and those subjects, and they were telling us the story, the narrative, what happened with them. Storytelling is capable of making meaningful connections between data and ideas. And you can make connections between interest and the lives of the readers. And then making those connections are going to increase that chances of understanding what we want to tell. And as I said before, this is a process that is much an structured process as it is an art, no? And creating narratives, telling stories is something that you need to practice, develop, and they are not magical ones or magical spells to get it right. It's more the response of the audience that is going to tell us if we're doing a good job or not that good job. Remember that that's the cycle that we have been explaining. When you have a visual, then you need to be open for the feedback, and then you are going to improve your visualization, and in this case your story or the storytelling. That stories differ in important ways from traditional storytelling, because stories in text, stories on film, they have a progression, no? But when we are and that progression is controlled. Is controlled by whom? Is controlled by the author. Is controlled by the way that we present. Even though there are some exemptions, that there are some kind of books that you have some kind of interactivity, and you have the option, hey, if you think that this is going to happen to the character, then go to page X or page Y, and then the narrative is going to change. And also there are some experiments in film. If you go to Netflix, there is a series that you can select what's going to happen with the characters, and you can have a really short show that is like 30 minutes. Everybody just solve the things really quickly, or you can have a little bit more longer show, and the name is Black Mirror. If you look into Black Mirror series, there are some that are linear stories and control progression, but there is one particular episode, there is a particular feature in the series that you can choose the actions of the characters and have that progression. But still, there is a storyline there. There is some predefined elements. While when we are creating stories with data, is you can guide the user in some direction, but their own insights, their own experience, their own interaction with the data and the way that you are telling the story is going to modify also the interpretation. Then it's not that straightforward, and when you introduce the interactivity that we have discussed before, then it's going to be even more unpredictable or more variable the result. Then how we contrast the narrative versus story, and I was saying that some authors, they use them interchangeable, and usually they are synonymous. But when we talk about narrative, we are referring to the macro structure of the of the document or the macro structure of what is happening, while the story includes that structure, includes the narrative, but also includes the content. What happened with the character? What are the twists? What are the experience? What are the feelings? What are the special concepts, the temporal concepts? All that thing is part of the story. Then, if we go and think into the narrative structure, basically it's an account of a series of events, facts that are provided in an order, and there is a established connection between them. Then, usually, the central paradigm in this definition is that there is a cause-effect relationship there. And when we have stories that follow this structure and the narrative, then they are going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is like an introduction, the middle is where everything is happening, and at the end is the conclusion. And if you think in the main art storytelling in the graph, then we have a beginning, we have a middle, we have a beginning, we have a middle, that is the story that is happening, and we have an end. Or we can have a beginning, a middle, an intermediate end. Then we have a new beginning, but it's part of the narrative, and we have this. And these are the additional factors that are correlated. And then we have a story going up and another story coming down with the outcomes or results that we already illustrate. When we are creating narrative structures, then we need to be aware of three things and how they interact and with the reader of the observer, and they are the order, the interaction, and the message. Always the narratives are going to have that. And you can see, for example, in movies, there are movies that are written backwards, where, like Memento, that this is a character that has amnesia, and it is the narrative is backwards because the subject can only retain small amounts of memory. Then previous things are unknown, but the way that they tell the story is backwards. Interaction, we already said that usually when you have a book or you have a film, you don't have that much interaction. The message is, hey, what we want to tell, what is the action that we want to have. And then we can have two basic approaches when we have an author-driven or author-oriented narrative, and we can have a reader-driven narrative. And usually the author-driven are linear orders of scenes where there is a heavy message, there is something, there is definitely a script, something that the author wants to tell or transmit, and there is an intention, and the interactivity is low. I already exemplified that the interactivity could be enhanced, but still there is going to be an order, and there is going to be a message and an actual thread that is going to be predefined by the author. But when we have narratives that are driven by the reader, there is no prescribed order. And if you look into the Minard's chart, maybe somebody is going to start not by the lines, and actually can start with the original graph, with what's happening in the campaign to Spain. But somebody would say, hey, no, I'll start from bottom to up, and I want to see this, or I want to see what the different cities are, or I want to see what the numbers actually are, and what was the magnitude of the event, or hey, what are the geographical references, or what these lines are, these rivers, and what is the effect of the river that had in the dynamic of the story. Hey, how much people was lost crossing those rivers, and you see there are a lot of things that can be derived from the from the from the story and the visualization that the reader can create new orders or new lines of scripting. There is no predefined message because even though it's constrained by the data, the reader can create its own story based on what is presented. And definitely the interactivity is free because it's the interaction of the brain of the observer with the element that is being presented. Also, that said, there are some films, some books, and some narratives and some stories that are created in such way that the conclusion is given to the reader, and that's one particular form of art and visual expression and written expression, but it's not the regular norm. But then we are going to be navigating between these two extremes, no, and looking for the balance. And when we create storytelling with data, we are allowing more narratives in the side of the reader, of the spectator, than in the author. But the author in any case is going to have some input, some to say, because he's the one that is selecting the data, is the one that is selecting the visuals, is the one that is creating the context and has an intention there. But not always the intention is that clear, and there could be additional conclusions created by the reader. As we have said before, then the visualization themselves, when we are creating this storytelling, we can have multimedia there. We can have text, we can have images, we can have video, and can also be interactive. Then enabling those stories to be dynamic in the reader or on the author, no? And that's part of the beauty of telling stories with visuals. We have agreed that the graphic displays are often very effective communicating information, and we can use this example. You have the link in the Blackboard to explore the Lifelines project, but let me try to introduce you these ways of electronic health record representations like Lifelines. And if we have down here, we have Linda Simpson, that is a female patient, 40-year-old, that between 92 and 98 was visiting the doctor. She was a smoker from 92 to 94. She had an episode of depression in 92, Lyme disease and arthritis. In 94, she was diagnosed with obesity. Then she started coming to regular checkups to the doctor. At the middle, and also in the 92, she has an appendectomy. It required an hospitalization, and because she was having that depression problem, she was receiving Prozac. But then, when she started having this obesity problem and the checkup, she was more thoughtful in the different tests that we're doing and related with the checkup. They discovered an atrial flutter, and the patient received some hair drugs. At the end of 94, the patient had a flu that ended being a pneumonia, and required to be hospitalized because of the pneumonia. And at that moment, the patient received antibiotics. She was also given a TB test because they were thinking that maybe it was not just a pneumonia and be sure that there was no TB. And they discharged the patient, then continue the checkup, and at the end of 95, she started with episodes of knee pain that required a knee surgery in the beginning of 96. That knee pain was managed with Advil and physical therapy. And remember that the patient was obese, and then this moment, in the middle of 95, they decided to put the patient in a low salt fat and low fat diet. Because the knee surgery, they apply a tetanus shot, and after the knee pain and obesity and being not that much movement, regardless of the physical therapy, the patient started complaining of fatigue that evolved into diabetes. Then now it has a series of blood work, and diabetes required to use some insulin. And at the beginning of 97, the patient was found pregnant, and now is coming to a visit because that's the situation. Or here we have another problem, another patient that has had ongoing problems with headaches, seizures. Is a smoker that quit smoking here. It has a thoracic outlet syndrome and some depression. It has been documented allergy to penicillin. It creates an anaphylaxis. Codeine, it creates angioedema, and aspirin creates it gives the patient rash, and Toradol gives the patient angioedema. The different diagnoses are several episodes of migraine, some episodes, acute episodes of depression, and here are the moments that the smoking has been documented, and the ways that the patient has confirmed the diagnostics of seizure. The chief complaints for different visits, we can see how they spread over time, sometimes by headache, sometimes by migraine, even though the symptom could be the same, and also constipation when they have received some lab, and all the pharmacological profile that the patient have. It will be enhanced if we know when it started and it finished, but at least we have an spectrum in the last in this year and in these 4 months, what the patient has been prescribed and how is in the immunization. Then this is a way of telling story, and this is a clinical story, a medical story. And as you see, the narrative is just created by the visuals, and somebody can read this from bottom to up. Somebody can just look into a specific time frame and create their own narrative. But you see that the visuals can facilitate the understanding. Can you imagine reading this from a chart, from paragraphs? Is going to take forever. The amount of words that you need to have in order to represent this data is going to be humongous, and that's part of the challenge that we have in how we document and how we summarize healthcare information. Then, really important, the elements of that we need to consider when telling a story is who is the character, what is doing, where, when, why, and how. Okay, that the story is that, and then in the case here, then who is Linda, what, all these events, where, then we know that this was in the hospital, this was in the lab, and the visits. when, we have the dates, why, we were able to do some correlations of, hey, what this medication? Because we have this diagnosis. And how, then we see some evolutions. It's not really powerful in the how, but we can see here flu becomes pneumonia, or the fatigue becomes diabetes, for example. And those are the type of things that we look into the stories. Then visual storytelling is of critical importance to create that intuitive and fast exploration of very large data resources. And that's what I was saying. If you look into that clinical record, that's a huge data set that is being comprised in really concrete representation that allows to abstract that information quickly. Then we need to further understand how the interaction of each genre and each particular audience, and understanding that, and there are going to be advantage and disadvantage of what we apply in this storytelling, and of course how that can affect the content, how this can affect the learning. And we need to think that hypothesis is an assertion, and when you elaborate that hypothesis, basically you are creating a story. Then the key elements that we want to create is understand the context, and if you see it here, implement, create, change, support, empower. Yes, but what are the tasks? What are the questions? What are that typology that the user is going to be solving? And then how we map that to choose an effective visual. Because if we anticipate the action that we want to have, and we can anticipate the questions, then we can design for that effective visual. And once we start looking into the visuals, we eliminate the clutter. We eliminate the things that are extraneous or create confusion. We can use some of the properties of interactivity to focus the attention. And once we focus the attention, then we can go and tell a story. Then, if you are going to tell stories, you need to know who is your audience, what is the key message that you want to convey, what questions might your visualization spur, what is going to happen, what is not clear here, then you need to be a step ahead of that. And then do you have answer to those questions? Because if you don't have answer to those questions, maybe you need to refocus your visualization. And what is the type of conversation or the type of interaction that may be a result of that interaction? Then when you have a well-told story, you have great quantity of information in relatively few words or in a relative few visuals. And the format is going to be easily assimilated by the listener or the viewer. Something that is clear is people find it easier to understand information that is put into stories than information that is just spelled out in serial list. If you have a table or you just make a list, and actually this is a method for enhanced memory. That's why we have mnemonics, no? And we create kind of stories around things that we want to memorize that are basically lists. But when you have stories, things are easier to retrieve and understand in our brain. And as we said, image hold a considerable amount of information that a viewer can grasp quickly, even quicker than we can speak or that we can describe, as we demonstrate, for example, with this timelines. Then the key elements for storytelling with data. Then we have the data, we have the narratives, and we have the visuals. And How do we use them? When you link the data and the narrative, you are able to explain, you are providing context to your data, where it comes from, what is relevant, what you did with the data. It helps to explain to your audience what is happening in that and what is important, what is the highlight. Then you can have data and narratives. Yeah, you can have the table and you have your narrative, and this is the traditional way of writing a paper. An academic paper, you have data and you have a narrative, or you have a data report, or that's a way of doing that. If you have data and visuals, that's data visualization, you enlighten the audience. Then if you create a good visualization that shows clearly the data, what they mean, then you are enlightening that data. But look that it doesn't explain necessarily what is the context, or what is this coming from, or what is the justification for this. And when you have narratives and visuals, you can engage your audience. And that's a clear, concise communication that basically, when you have good visualization, you can create that engagement and then draw them into grabbing the attention. And that's the effect of the infographics that we presented the previous session, that basically you have a narrative with visuals, and sometimes we introduce the data there. And then the storytelling is, yes, you take the data, you take the narrative, you take the visuals, you pack them together, and we provide that. But how do we create those narratives, or how do we create those stories? Then the recommendation is work out your story. Okay, what is going to be your story? And we said that we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. When we are talking about the beginning, the middle, and the end, we can also think in a structure like and, but, and therefore. Then and refers to, hey, this is a fact, this is a fact, this is a fact, this is a fact, but hey, look at this in a different way, or there is a lack of understanding here, or look, here is where the conflict is happening. And that's what makes stories really, really appealing, because you have a conflict. What is happening with the character? What is happening with this data? And in the yes, not everything is what it seems to do. Then invite the people to explore that, and therefore is the conclusion. That's how our hero resolved the thing. This is how we solve all this entanglement of this data, and that conflict is being resolved. Then if you structure your stories in this way, you are going to be entertaining. And if you look into the way that usually a lecture is created, we have aims. Those are aims. Then we try to present the content. Sometimes we present counterparts, disadvantage, contrast that go in both directions. And at the end we have the conclusions and the closure. The same thing is when you are trying to tell a story with visuals or a narrative. You need to know your data, and definitely you need to choose the correct charts or the correct visuals. Also, there are some style recommendations, especially in colors. You don't want to mix two more than two different color palettes, and if you are using two different color palettes, you don't want color palettes that overlap in your visuals in such way that you are going to create unwanted confusion. And for computer visualization, these are the fonts that are recommended, or the font types that are recommended for visual appealing. There have been a lot of usability studies in how people read, And Trebuchet is really good for web. Times New Roman is the traditional one that was in the newspapers and is from the New York Times actually. Arial is the default font that we have usually in Word. Georgia is a little bit more stylized font that is between Times Roman and Arial that is less heavy than the Arial, and Calabri is a little bit more stylized style. And this has been studied, and they allowed even to be readable even with partial printing, and they have really interesting visual cues that you can capture. Because using comic or using these heavy loaded fonts is cumbersome for the people, and to try to extract information, then try to stick to these ones, and you are going to have more chances of success. Then we are going to dedicate the practical session in exploring examples of storytelling. But we can see that some visual systems have begun to incorporate storytelling into the design. And it's not just that they're going to be visual systems to create visuals, but also systems that allow us to create those narratives and create stories and make them accessible. Some of them are geotime stories. Then we can annotate stories using a text editor and doing some bookmarking and use geotemporal analysis. Tableau has now a feature for create graphical stories, and it let the users review, collate and export key points or those in order to create those visual analyses. Tableau Public, in particular, that's we are going to be using that to the third homework for the final. No, I'm sorry, for the second homework. The third one is in data wrapper. To construct and publish this in a easy way on the web, and we can enrich the visuals, and it has been used in finance and sport journalism, and we are going to explore that in healthcare. Gapminder, we already have seen Gapminder, and is that one with the bubbles, and this type of storytelling was really famous by the TED talk that Hans Rosling presented about the human development trends using the Human Developer Index, and we have introduced Gapminder a little bit in previous sessions. And take into account that in this context, another key elements that we want to incorporate into our visuals is we want to create a headline for every single slide or every single screen or every single segment in our dashboard or visual. And that headline is going to tell what is the most significant data finding you want to share. Basically, how do you want to grab the attention? What is your hypothesis? What is your conclusion even that this is what is happening. The headline of the news. Consider photography or illustration. Not always you need to rely on charts or traditional visualization. You can consider some illustration in that headline or in the context, but remember, don't overlap data over images, because it could be distracting. Highlight important data, then create that focus. Use the color, use size, use shapes. Attract the attention to specific areas of your slide or specific areas of your segment of the visual. Don't use a chart if you don't need one. You don't need to fill things with charts, no? Sometimes just a simple shape or the photography or are enough to help illustrate the story. Minimize the noise, remember, less is better. Be minimalist, just show things that are necessary for the message, and don't supply anything that is extraneous. Be selective in whatever you are telling, and this is reinforcing things that we have discussed in human-centered design, reinforce things that we have discussed in the mapping, selection, and typology that we have done in previous sessions. There is a new research area in visualization, and there are so many things that they are doing, but it goes from several domains, including computer graphics, visualization, cognitive psychology. There are many theories about storytelling, and this is an evolving topic. And as I said, for example, in this order of ideas, people is challenging, even though Minard has been considered one of those original examples of storytelling. They say, no, this is not really a story because time is not there. There is no progression of time, even though you can have the insight because the space is related with time. There is no clear notion of time in that story. Then there's a missing element there, but still it's a valid example. And we can say that visualization definitely is a powerful tool that is not limited to information visualization. It could be used for analytics, it could be used for decision making and action. But however, to tell a good story, you need to augment the visuals with text, with audio, with video, or links to other information. And techniques like the connected scatter plot or some slope graphs are not really useful sometimes to telling story. The storytelling features include providing different views of the same data. Then you can understand that better. And telling stories about data is also a natural outcome when you use visualization in collaborative settings. In the context of the research, then there are questions that are there. Are the current storytelling platforms considering the role of the author and supporting the authorship process, or is more focused on the user? What type of narratives, structures, and visual best apply to storytelling and visualization? You see that I provide you with some back techniques and ideas, fonts, contrast, and we go back to visualization and try to understand the public, but they are not really good guidelines that maps your audience, your narrative, your type of structures. And like we have genres in literature and genres in filmmaking, like we have sci-fi, we have romantic, we have comedy. Then we still need to explore that in storytelling. How is going to be storytelling in scientific domain? How is going to be storytelling for behavioral change? How is going to be scientific storytelling for adoption of healthcare recommendations or to follow rules? We don't know if static transitions, dynamic transition are more effective for storytelling visualization. There are open questions. Can we say that storytelling or visualization increase the memorability of data or increase the knowledge that people can gain? Because yes, I have shown you that storytelling can increase memorability when you want to remember lists, but can this storytelling and visuals increase that as well? How is this thinking of people that are considered that they are visual learners? Are we really visual learners, and how that map, and what are the strategies that we need to explore in order to maintain and retain that data, that information, or that knowledge for longer time? In which way that storytelling and visualization help? interpreting the data, or how we know that it seems to be better, people are getting there, but how is that happening, and what is the most effective way of engaging your audience? Is colors, fonts, location, the narrative itself of the title, of how you are going to attract the audience. And definitely we need to have a deeper understanding of storytelling strategies and visualization. We need to know that many visualizations are evaluated based on the time that it takes to complete a task and the accuracy of response, but are we how we evaluate the real understanding, or how they are really extracting those deep insights. We need to create more research data, and here I'm throwing you some ideas that you can use in your capstone for the master. There need to create more metrics that include engagement, interest, availability to remember, and things like that. And definitely there is a need for a systematic study in visualization techniques and how that affect the effectiveness of storytelling these devices. Then today we introduced the concept of storytelling, we introduced the concept of narrative, and we made that distinction that narrative is a structure, story is the structure with the content, and storytelling is basically how we take that narrative and genre, how we create a story, and we put things together, and we illustrate in some way how visuals and how visualization can help us to support stories, and how then we can use visuals, text, and other elements put together in order to be able to tell stories and create some narratives that are going to be influencing and being interactive in the users. I hope that this has been useful, that we are advancing in the concepts. I expect you to bring questions to the interactive sessions, and we are going to be playing with some of these tools and having new approaches. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.